Ari, Penn State made the playoff, did not get Wally pipped by Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Their reward is they get to go to State College, Pennsylvania, not for a whiteout, for a big noon kickoff on ESPN, well, on TNT, against Penn State.
There's nothing like a whiteout, man. Penn State's home atmosphere is absolutely insane. And, at that time of the year, too, Andy, like snowstorm is on the table. So I don't know what SMU is going to get into.
They have the occasional ice storm in Dallas, so who knows?
There was an ice storm in Dallas 2 years ago, and they shut down the city for 3 days. It was insane. No daycare for me. It was kind of a tough week for me. But so this is interesting, right? Because Penn State has been the team that I've railed against quite a bit in the expansion era, which is teams like Penn State can just be who they've always been, make the playoff, nothing's changed, and they're not forced to get better. But the fact is that Penn State, although they have 2 losses and their only losses on their schedule are to the teams that are in this picture too, which is more of the same, I still think is a little bit better than they've been in the past. And, they played in the Big Ten championship and they earned their spot. Okay. Now, is upset as Penn State fans want to be at James Franklin, probably for losing the Oregon game last night, the actual silver lining to losing that game is that they were rewarded. They were rewarded with a easier path to the semifinal, which in turn now puts James Franklin in the hot seat, which is you lose any of the first 2 games in the playoff, and it's going to be a long, sad summer in Happy Valley. So, there's a reward, but the consequence and the price for that reward is pressure and expectation.
2 things. One, do you think they're mad at him for losing that game,
I don't know.
Are they encouraged? Because that is as good as we've seen Penn State's offense really probably since Trace McSorley and Saquon were playing.
I mean, my takeaway was that was one of the best performances that I've seen from Penn State in years.
Right, and if they're not playing Oregon,
they probably beat everybody else, right?
Everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, they but the thing about it is I think that there's glass half full or glass half empty. I guess it depends on who you're asking. Because on the other hand, too, it's they had that awful pick before halftime that set up Oregon for an extra touchdown that turned out to be the difference in the score. They had some face mask penalties. I mean, the 2-point conversion people are giving him shit about, even though that's what everyone does. Right. I don't think that's something you should get upset about.
The analytics make sense for that, yeah.
I think that there's just a certain point where it's if you're a Penn State fan, you're not in this for moral victories. But the best part about this is that in the 12-team era, you don't finish your season on that loss. You get to turn the page. You get to host a playoff game, and you're going to be doing it against 2 teams in a row that you'll likely be favored by. The first game, I believe that they're an 8.5-point favorite against SMU. And the second game, I think they would be a touchdown favorite against
7.5 right now.
So, yeah.
So here's the thing. Like you said, the expansion for Penn State means something different than it means for most other programs. The expansion for Penn State means you keep doing what you're doing and you get in the playoff. Now, Penn State, they want to see more. That fan base wants to see more from James Franklin than they've seen in the James Franklin era. More is you win this game. More is then you go to the Fiesta Bowl and you beat Boise State. That's what they want to see.
Yeah.
If they don't do both of those things, I think they will consider this a disappointment. Now, this SMU team they're playing is no pushover. It is a strange situation because SMU was in the American last year. This was their first year in the ACC. They didn't lose a conference game in the regular season. They lost to Clemson on Saturday night. But if you watch that game against Clemson, it looked like they were going to get the doors blown off. And then they came back and they realized, oh, we can play in a game like this.
Yeah.
I thought Kevin Jennings did a really good job of recovering after throwing one of the worst picks you will ever see in your life and leading them on a drive that, I mean, if Clemson's kicker doesn't have one of the best leg swings he's ever had, we may be talking about this completely differently because SMU's in the playoff and Alabama's playing Penn State.
Yeah. So SMU, I thought, and I don't know if you picked up on the game or this on the game while you were watching it last night, but SMU was in 2 moments too big mode for the first half. And then I thought they settled down and it flipped and they ended up losing the game. But I thought once they were just okay, we belong here, they did a really good job of competing in there. And I thought that Kevin Jennings went from deer in headlights to aggressive.
Right. And
there was a flip for him in the game too.
I do wonder if now that they've found that feeling of we belong here.
Like if the ACC championship game is kind of like the test run for the next game.
Right. Do they come in with that feeling now? Because if they do, this is going to be a really close game.
Yeah, right. I think that Penn State is going to be, at an advantage for two reasons. One, they've got better players from top to bottom. But two, being in that stadium at home in that environment in the cold, like I think that like this favors Penn State,
which is supposed to. That's the whole point.
That's the point of this.
Yeah.
So like Penn State's in a position where, it gets to, I think SMU is lucky it's not a night game because there's nothing like night games there. But yeah, like I mean, SMU. And here's the thing that I think is going to be interesting to see that may or may not differ from the basketball tournament. But there are some teams in the NCAA tournament that are just like, once you make the field, like that's your accomplishment for the year. Like when these teams make the playoff now, like you are a touchdown underdog and you're supposed to lose, but like they absolutely could win. So how are these teams going to show up and approach this? Are they going to approach it as SMU can hang a playoff banner? Or are they going to approach it like, because guess what? If SMU wins, they could go to the semis.
They could.
Like, and Boise could go to the semis too. I'm not trying to disparage Boise, but I'm saying like, it's not like 2020 Alabama's waiting for them in the next round. Like there is a lot to play for here for both teams. So, I think what's interesting here is what you told me would happen. And it's already happened in year one. We haven't even watched, but you told me this about Penn State. Because 2 years ago when we were arguing about the expansion of the playoff, I used to say, what, so now Penn State just gets to make the playoff and that's considered a successful year?
Won't be good enough.
You said that the narrative and the expectations would change, and it's already they haven't even played a playoff game yet. And I just feel like James Franklin, if they lose to SMU, because say what you want about the Oregon game, Andy, he is 1-14 against AP top 10 opponents and has lost 11 straight, dude. Like that's like insane.
Good news. The AP doesn't have SMU in the top 10.
That's great news. Makes it even harder to lose. So like,
but
that's the thing. Like Penn State is playing a team that it should beat in a game that the fans are craving. And it's like Penn State has done such a good job of winning all the games that they're expected to win. And they've done an awful job getting the fan base the wins that they crave. So this is an opportunity for Franklin. We could spend all day talking about how stupid the seeding is, but they did come out on the easier path here than Oregon. After
they got it laid out for them.
So
there are 2 games they should win.
So the consequence for that, because nothing in life is free, is expectations in the end. Because like even if SMU would have been left out and Alabama was in, like I feel like the PR hit of losing to SMU, even though I think SMU is just as good as Bama, is going to be a lot worse.
Right. I mean, Penn State still would have been favored over Alabama too. But I think that like from a fan standpoint, you would agree with this. Losing to SMU stings more. Right.
Now
here's a fun stat for those who may be wondering, like, what's this SMU team about? We talk about the offense. Obviously, Rhett Lashley is an offensive coach, but SMU's defense is very good. In fact, SMU's defense and Penn State's defense are tied for the number 8 spot in the country in yards per play allowed. 4.65 yards per play.
Electric.
So Penn State's a really good defense. We all agree on that. Like there's no debate about that. Now, granted, Oregon sliced them up, but that's what Oregon does to everybody.
Yeah, it's like, I saw James Franklin was asked in the post game about his defense, and it's like, in the playoff, when you play Oregon, you have to score 40. Like it's like, I don't care how good your defense is.
They actually, again,
and they got to stop at the end of the game when they need one.
This is why the Big Ten championship game was more encouraging for me with regard to Penn State than anything, because it showed that they can compete in a game like that. They didn't win it, but maybe the next time they will. And if you can compete with Oregon, you can compete with anyone in this bracket.
And the best part about it too was that they were down by 13 or 14. I don't remember what the math was because of the messed up 2-point, but they were down by 2 touchdowns late in the game. They scored a touchdown to get within 8 points and then got a stop.
Right. They had the ball.
They had the ball down
1 possession. They were in the game. So I am very encouraged by that. That said, if SMU does not have the deer in the headlights, the moment's too big for us look that it had at the beginning of the ACC championship game, this is going to be a tight game. And Penn State's going to have to figure out how to win it. Now, I like that Penn State has shown us that its offense can move the ball and not be sluggish. And because that was the problem in the Ohio State game, is like they just couldn't get anything going.
Yeah.
And against Oregon, which is a good defense also, it looked completely different. Drew Aller looked more comfortable. Like everything looked
Even
better.
good as a runner.
Yeah.
In that game.
Yeah. And the fact is they don't have great receivers. We know that. We know Penn State's problem is the receiving core. If they had good receivers, we'd be talking about them as a national title favorite.
But it didn't like against Ohio State. It felt like they had bad receivers. Last night, it didn't feel that way.
It felt very different. And so if that team shows up against SMU, then that's what Penn State needs. That will be the win they need. It'll take them to the Boise State game, and then they got to win that one too, because that'll also be a disappointment if they don't win that one. But they've got to be careful. Do not underestimate the Mustangs, because they can stuff you if they need to, and they can keep the score down. So this might actually wind up being more of a Penn State game like we're used to seeing from most of the Franklin era. This might be one of those 24-17 type games.
Yep. Yeah. They got to win, man.
They got to
win.
Oh,
yep.
It'll be a horrific disappointment if they lose. SMU, house money.